What's up, everybody? Welcome to Sports Earth. In this video, I'll be doing a complete preview of the 2021-2022 college basketball season, and we've got a lot to cover in this video. We're going to be going through my preseason top 25, and we'll be doing predictions, and at the end, we'll have my projected national champions. So we've got a lot to cover in this video, so without any further ado, let's get started. So we're going to begin with my preseason top 25. So this will just be the 25 teams that I think are the best heading into the season. Now, these preseason rankings are based so much on speculation, especially with college basketball. Freshmen make such a big impact. You never know how these guys are going to translate. You never know how much players are going to improve. So this is just sort of to gauge the idea of where I think teams stand heading into the season. At number 1, this should not be a surprise to anybody. I have the Gonzaga Bulldogs. So Gonzaga, this is a great team heading into this season. We see them year in, year out, so much talent. Mark Few does such a great job with this team, and this year's going to be no different. You're bringing back Drew Timmy. He's going to be a top contender to win the Wooden Award for Player of the Year. You're bringing in 5-star true freshman Chet Holmgren, who is one of the most highly touted big men over the past few years. And you still have impact players all across the board, and they're really going to be able to make plays for this team. You're looking at Andrew Nembhard, Anton Watson. These guys are going to be able to make plays, and you're bringing in a good recruiting class. So Gonzaga, even though you lose Corey Kispert and Jalen Suggs and all those guys, it should not be much of a step down at all for the Bulldogs. This year, they're going to look to finish the job after making the national championship last season. Next up at number 2 is the Kansas Jayhawks. Kansas is a very, very good-looking team. I think this team has the potential to be great this upcoming season. So when you look at Kansas, Bill Self has a really good squad to work with. You lose Marcus Garrett, but he's really your only big loss. You still have some very impactful players on this roster. One guy that I really like is big man David McCormick. But you're also bringing in a solid recruiting class, and you're bringing in a couple transfers, including Arizona State's Remy Martin, and he is going to make a huge impact this year. So it's going to be the combination of the guys you're returning and the transfers that are going to make a huge impact for Kansas this season. Next up, number 3 is UCLA. UCLA, they had a magical run in the NCAA tournament. They made it all the way to the Final Four, but they weren't amazing in the regular season. In fact, they barely made the NCAA tournament. So I have them ranked at number 3, but there are so many question marks with this team, and I would not be surprised if UCLA is a total flop this year. And I totally understand why people have them ranked in that 6 to 10 range, but I am going to have UCLA ranked here at number 3. Their only big loss is Chris Smith. But you get Johnny Juzang back, you get Jamie Jaquez, and you get Tiger Campbell, Cody Riley. All these guys are coming back. You're adding Peyton Wilson and Miles Johnson to come play some very solid defense. Those guys are going to help you out a lot. And I think overall UCLA has a very talented roster. They have a lot of experience, and that's going to be a nice thing to have at the top level of college basketball, where so many teams just have these one-and-done players. But UCLA's experience, I think, could be very, very important as the season goes on. But I think this is a risky pick all the way up here at number 3. So I totally understand why some people are not all in on this team. At number 4, I've got the Texas Longhorns. Texas is a team that I am all in on. So you see Texas, they lose Matt Coleman, Jericho Sims, Greg Brown, Kai Jones. You're thinking, okay, maybe Texas takes a step back. They were really good last year. But no, you bring back Andrew Jones, you bring back Courtney Ramey, and you bring in so much. And that's what's going to make Texas really special this year, is everybody that they're bringing in. And we're going to talk about this with a few other teams. But chemistry, a potential issue, just with so many new faces on the team. But you're looking at a couple very solid recruits, and you're bringing in Marcus Carr, you're bringing in Trey Mitchell, you're bringing in Timmy Allen. Those 3 guys are big-time scorers. Marcus Carr from Minnesota, Trey Mitchell from UMass, and Timmy Allen from Utah. All 3 of those guys are big-time scorers, and they're going to help fill the holes that the guys departing are leaving behind. And those aren't the only transfers that you're bringing in either. You're bringing in a few other guys, but I think those guys are the best. So you're bringing in a new head coach in Chris Beard, and that is, it's going to be a different adjustment. It's going to be different than having Shaka Smart there. But you've got a lot of players that want to come in here and play for Chris Beard, and I think it's going to be a really good season for Texas. You see 2 Big 12 teams in the top 5. Can they make it 3? No, I've got Michigan here, the first Big 10 team at number 5. So for Michigan, the Wolverines had a very good season last year. They're very well coached, and they have a lot of talent. Now, they do lose some of that talent. Isaiah Livers, Franz Wagner, Mike Smith, Johnny Brown, all leaving. But you're bringing back Hunter Dickinson, who was great last year. Eli Brooks had a very good season. And, outside of that, you're not bringing back a lot. But you're bringing in recruits, Caleb Houston and Musa Diabate. And you are also bringing in a transfer from Coastal Carolina, who made a huge impact for the Chanticleers last year in Devontae Jones. So I think this is going to be another very talented Michigan squad, and a Michigan squad that's going to rely heavily on Hunter Dickinson. I think he has the potential to be one of the best players in the country this year. At number 6 is Villanova. There are some concerns with this Villanova squad about their depth with the bigs, and that's understandable given the loss of Jeremiah Robinson-Earl, but this team still has so much talent. You're bringing back Colin Gillespie after his injury last year. Justin Moore's coming back, Jermaine Samuels, and you are also bringing in a couple very solid recruits. So you're adding to a very solid Villanova squad who is going to have to replace Jeremiah Robinson-Earl, and that is a big concern. But there's so much talent on Villanova, and they're really well coached by Jay Wright, and overall I think they are set up very well this season in the Big East. At number 7 is the Kentucky Wildcats. Kentucky, they had a down year last year, but they have so much talent and so much depth this year. I think could be a very good season for Kentucky. So you're losing B.J. Boston, Olivier Sarr, Isaiah Jackson. You're losing all those guys, but the team that they have is really impressive. You've got Davion Mintz, Keon Brooks, Dante Allen, Jacob Toppin, and Lance Ware all returning from last year's squad. And you're bringing in, and this is what I'm really excited about, is how much Kentucky is bringing in. You're bringing in Ty Washington, Damian Collins, Bryce Hopkins. Those guys are all recruits. You're bringing in Kellen Grady from Davidson, Severe Wheeler from Georgia, Oscar Tshiebwe from West Virginia, and C.J. Frederick from Iowa. And those guys are all going to offer unique skill sets to a Kentucky team that I think has a lot of depth. But a lot of that depth is coming in brand new to this Kentucky program. So there could be some obvious concerns like we talked about earlier with chemistry. And it's going to be something to watch with Kentucky this year. But I think look for Severe Wheeler and Ty Washington in that backcourt to really make an impact and take this Kentucky team very, very far. Next up at number 8 is Baylor. The Baylor Bears, they are the defending national champions, so you expect them to be ranked pretty high, and I want to rank them higher, but I'm really concerned with the amount that they're losing. You're losing Jared Butler, Davion Mitchell, Maceo Teague, and Mark Vital, but you do bring back a few very solid players, a few role players, though. None of these guys were really big-time scorers for you last year. You're losing 3 double-digit scorers. And Baylor does bring in a few players, a couple transfers, and a couple recruits. But I just don't think this is going to be quite the same Baylor squad offensively. But look for some of those guys that were role players last year to really step up and make a huge impact. At number 9 is Purdue. This Purdue team is getting a lot of hype this year, and for good reason. You don't really lose a lot. You bring back Travion Williams, one of the best big men in the country. Jaden Ivey had a great year last year. Zach Edey, your big center, he was a freshman last year. He was very impressive, and he's only going to improve. And you've got a lot of depth on this team as well. You bring in a couple of recruits that likely will make an impact at some point. So Purdue, they're set up very well. They've got a lot of talent on this year's roster. Next up at number 10 is Duke. So the big motivation for Duke this year that they're really trying to play off is that this is Coach K's final season. He has announced that he will be retiring after this upcoming college basketball season. So there's going to be so much motivation in this Duke program to play for Coach K and to win a championship for Coach K. And Duke does lose a few guys from last year's team. That was really disappointing. You do lose Matthew Hurt, DJ Stewart, Jalen Johnson, but you bring back Wendell Moore, you bring back Jeremy Roach, and this is what's really exciting about Duke, is what they're bringing in. You bring in Paolo Banchero, who is a potential top 5 draft pick in the upcoming NBA draft. He is going to have an amazing season. Trevor Keels, the very highly rated recruit, AJ Griffin, and you are also bringing in Theo John from Marquette. He's going to get some minutes. So Duke, I think, is setting themselves up well for Coach K's final season. You've got a lot of talent, but last year was disappointing, and they're going to have to bounce back, similar to Kentucky, but I think they will. And I'm trusting in Coach K to go out on a strong note. Next up at number 11 is Illinois. Illinois, the big loss for the Illini that's going to hurt, and we kind of expected this one to impact Illinois, and it likely will, is Ayo Dosunmu. He is finally gone. 20.1 points per game last season. He was such a great player for Illinois, but he is gone, so they're going to have to replace him. They also have to replace Adam Miller, but you get back Kofi Coburn, who is one of the best big men in college basketball, Trent Frazier, Andre Curbelo. You've got some really good players on this team, and you bring in some recruits. So I think that Illinois, even though you lose Ayo, I think that they have a lot of underrated talent because Ayo and Kofi really got all the spotlight last year. But there's a reason this Illinois team was a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. Next up, at number 12, is Houston. The Houston Cougars, they made the Final Four last year, and they're returning a good bit of that production. This team was so great defensively, and while you do lose multiple starters, you bring back Marcus Sasser, and you bring back Fabian White, and you bring back Tremont Mark. So these guys are going to make impacts, and you bring in a couple transfers from across the country, including Kyler Edwards from Texas Tech, and you bring in a few recruits. So I think that Houston is going to take a slight step back from their Final Four run, but this is going to be a good Houston team. They're still bringing back a solid amount of talent, and expect Houston to be right in the middle of the American Athletic Conference race. And the other team that will be up there with them is the Memphis Tigers. Memphis might be the most hyped up team of this offseason, and for good reason. You bring back Landers Nolley. He was a very impactful transfer in there. DeAndre Williams also coming back. But the real reason this team is getting the hype, you bring in Amani Bates, you bring in Jalen Duren, 2 top 10 recruits in this recruiting class. You bring in Earl Timberlake from Miami. And this is going to be a very, very good Memphis team. So much talent, so much young talent on Memphis. And Penny Hardaway has a lot to work with here. But as we mentioned earlier, chemistry is going to be an issue for some of these teams. Memphis likely will be one of those teams that is going to suffer from some chemistry issues. So that's the big question mark. But if they can put it all together, they are one of the most talented teams in the country. Next up at number 14 is the Alabama Crimson Tide. Alabama had a really surprising and a really impressive season last year. And I think they can follow that up with another strong campaign. They should be right in the middle of the SEC title race. So when you look at Alabama's roster, the Crimson Tide, they do lose John Petty, Herbert Jones, and Joshua Primo. But you bring back Jaden Shackelford, you bring back Javon Quinterly, and you bring in J.D. Davidson. Really hyped up freshman Namari Burnett also transferring in, and you get Noah Gurley from Furman. So you do lose quite a bit of talent. I think Herbert Jones is really going to hurt. But Alabama, Nate Oates is really building a good program there, and I think they're going to have a lot of talent this season. Next up, at number 15 is Ohio State. Ohio State had a disappointing exit in the NCAA tournament, but you can't let that cover up the fact that they were so good in the regular season. Dwayne Washington and C.J. Walker are gone, but E.J. Liddell returns, Kyle Young returns, Seth Towns returns, and you bring in a few recruits and you bring in a couple transfers, and that sets Ohio State up very well. They're playing in a very good Big Ten conference, but they have a lot of talent, and Ohio State is going to be up there once again in the rankings. Next up, number 16 is Oregon. So Oregon, they're going to have a shot to be right up there with UCLA this year. You do lose Chris Duarte, and that's really going to hurt because he was so great last year, and he's playing so great in the NBA right now. So that Chris Duarte loss, I think, is going to hurt more maybe than some people expect. But you do bring back Will Richardson, you bring back Eric Williams, you bring back N'Faly Dante, and you bring in Nate Biddle, a very highly rated recruit, Jacob Young from Rutgers. And he's not the only transfer, a few other transfers as well. They're going to make impacts as a scorer and really give this Oregon team some much needed depth. So I think Oregon is set up for a very successful season. They're going to have a good shot at UCLA this year. Next up at number 17 is Florida State. Leonard Williams in Florida State, year in, year out, regardless of the amount of talent they lose, they are excellent. This year should be no different. MJ Walker, Raekwon Gray, Scotty Barnes, all these guys are gone. But you bring back Anthony Polite, you bring back Malik Osborne, Raekwon Evans, and you bring in a few very solid recruits and a couple transfers, and you've got Florida State looking like a very solid team. And you know that Leonard Williams is going to coach them up very, very well. Next up, number 18 is Arkansas. I think Arkansas is sort of flying under the radar. They had a good year last year, and they were a very impressive team in the SEC, but you do lose Moses Moody, you lose Justin Smith, and maybe some people are sort of forgetting of how much talent they really have outside of those guys. You bring in a couple transfers that are really going to help as well, and you still bring back some talent from last year's roster. So Arkansas, they should be right up there in the middle of the SEC race. Next up at number 19 is Tennessee, another very good SEC team. So the big loss here is going to be Jaden Springer and Keon Johnson and Yves Pons. But outside of those guys, you still bring back John Fulkerson. Victor Bailey had a very good season last year. And you're bringing in some very highly rated recruits, including Kennedy Chandler. So not only those guys, but the transfers. Justin Powell coming over from Auburn, staying in the SEC, and he's not the only transfer. So I do believe that Tennessee will have a good roster this year. But it's going to be tough to keep up with the likes of Kentucky and Alabama and even Arkansas. But I think Tennessee has enough talent to stay up there in the top 25. Next up at number 20 is North Carolina. The Tar Heels, they also had a very disappointing year last year, and they will be without Roy Williams. He decided to retire this offseason, so North Carolina, they, without Roy Williams, how's the program going to look? Big question here. Garrison Brooks, Day'Ron Sharp, Walker Kessler, all leaving. But you bring back Armando Bacot and Caleb Love, and you bring in a couple transfers. And North Carolina, I think we're going to get back to usual North Carolina. They're going to be a very strong team and one of the top teams in the ACC. Next up at number 21 is Virginia. I really want to rank Virginia higher, but they lose so much talent, and it's going to be really tough for them to reload. Sam Hauser, Jay Huff, Trey Murphy, all those guys are gone. Now you bring in a couple transfers, and you bring back K.A. Clark, but there's just not a lot on this Virginia team, but they're still going to play good defense, and I think K.A. Clark really takes a step up this year. They're so well coached by Tony Bennett, so I definitely don't expect Virginia to fall off the map, but depth could turn out to be an issue. Next up, at number 22 is St. Bonaventure. St. Bonaventure might not be a team that you expect to see here among the likes of Virginia and North Carolina, but this is a really good-looking basketball team heading into this season, and they return so much, and that's what has people so excited about this year's St. Bonaventure team. So when you look at St. Bonaventure, you might be wondering what makes this team so special. It's the returns of everybody. Kyle Lofton, Jaron Holmes, Jaden Adway, all these guys, they're coming back 5, 10-point per game or higher scorers, and these guys are going to be able to make an impact. You bring in a couple transfers, and St. Bonaventure could be a very good team this upcoming season, but the big thing is they don't lose a lot. Next up, at number 23 is Indiana. So Indiana, they're in a very tough conference in the Big Ten, but they're going to be able to hold their own against some of the best teams due to their talent, led by Trace Jackson Davis. He's, of course, their star player. You do lose Armand Franklin and Al Durham, but you're still going to have a lot of talent. You bring in a couple of recruits and a couple of transfers. So Indiana, I think they could be a very good team this year. Next up at number 24 is Yukon. You look at Yukon, you're thinking they lose James Bouknight, they're off the map. But that's not the case. They had so much talent around James Bouknight, led by R.J. Cole and Tyrese Martin. These guys, they're going to be a special team this year. I think they could be challenging Villanova for the Big East title. And at number 25 is Auburn. You lose Sharif Cooper, and he was sort of Auburn's star player last year, but he was not the only thing to be excited about with Auburn. Alan Flanagan, I think, is going to have a big season, and they're going to miss Sharif Cooper. That is true, and that's really a given for this Auburn team. But they bring in a lot of talent, including Jabari Smith and a few transfers. So Auburn, they're going to have the depth, and it's going to be really interesting to see how they can compete in the SEC. So now we're going to move on to my conference predictions. I'm going to try to go pretty quick through these. So with the American Athletic Conference, I've got two of these teams in the preseason top 25. Can Houston have another special season? You lose a couple of starters, but you still bring back some talent. They were so good last year. They made the Final Four. Can they repeat it? How will all of Memphis' stars align? Memphis has so much talent, but as I talked about with a couple teams earlier, in the rankings, chemistry is going to be a big thing. It's going to be a potential issue, and I think Memphis will be one of those teams that could struggle with the chemistry, but if all the talent works together, Amani Bates, Jalen Duren, all these guys coached by Penny Hardaway, if everything goes well, Memphis could be a national title contender. And then could a third team emerge? Whether it's UCF, Wichita State, SMU, Cincinnati, one of these teams, could one of them become the third best team in the American and potentially challenge the ones at the top? Now, in the ACC, you see the standings there on the left for preseason top 25 teams. Can the conference bounce back? It was a little bit of a rough year for the ACC. Duke and North Carolina being down certainly did not help. So how will they respond? How will Duke and North Carolina respond to having those rough seasons? North Carolina, of course, you're working with a new head coach after Roy Williams retired. Duke, this is Coach K's final year, so they're going to be playing with motivation there in Durham. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see how those two schools respond. Can North Carolina, they've had a down couple of years, so can they stay up there with the likes of Florida State and Duke and Virginia, the teams that are always there at the top? And then how will Virginia be able to retool? I talked about them earlier. They lost so much talent, but they're so well coached. So I really wonder how they're going to be able to retool and if they're going to be able to still contend at the top of the ACC. Because if they struggle, that could most definitely open up the door for some of these teams like Virginia Tech and Notre Dame, I think, to really step up and become contenders in this conference. Next up is the Big East. So in the Big East, I've got two preseason teams in the top 25. Will Villanova stay at the top? There's a lot of concerns with this Villanova team, with the big men losing Jeremiah Robinson-Earl, and you've got Colin Gillespie coming off of an injury. So Villanova definitely has some questions, but right now they're the unquestioned number one team. Does Yukon live up to the hype? Can they really challenge Villanova, or did James Bouknight just mean too much to this team? We're going to learn a lot about Yukon this season. And then how far does Creighton fall? I'm really curious to see what happens to Creighton this year. You lose some talent. And Creighton, they're going to be a really interesting team here in the Big Ten, or in the Big East, just with all the storylines this offseason, and with the rest of the Big East potentially passing them. As you see here, I've got them all the way down at 8th in the conference. Next up, we've got the Big Ten, 5 teams in the preseason top 25. Can Purdue become elite? Matt Painter, he's had some very good teams here at Purdue, and I think this year's team could be one of his best. Just so much talent across the board. Travion Williams, Jaden Ivey, these guys are going to lead a very strong Purdue team, but they've got to be contenders with Michigan and Ohio State and Illinois, and that's going to be tough. But if they're going to be elite, they're going to have to contend with those teams. And then will Illinois and Michigan stay at the top? And you could really throw Ohio State in this question as well. But Illinois and Michigan, you lose some talent. Of course, with Illinois, you're losing Io. Michigan loses a couple of guys. And I think they are both going to stay up there, but maybe one of them could fall. And then which team could break out here in the Big Ten? I'm looking at Michigan State, Indiana. Rutgers, I think, loses too much talent here, but there are a few teams that could certainly break out in the Big Ten. And then all the way down there at number 14, I just want to talk about the talent that Minnesota lost for a second. Minnesota, they're going to be down there at the bottom. The Big Ten does have some pretty bad teams, but I think we could see a couple teams break out and maybe get themselves out of that double-digit area, looking at Wisconsin, Northwestern, Maryland. I think overall the Big Ten is a solid conference, but somebody is going to break out and challenge the top. Next up is the Big 12. 3 teams in the preseason top 25. Will Baylor stay atop college basketball? You lose Jared Butler, you lose Davion Mitchell, Maceo Teague. So you're losing a lot from your national championship team, but that's the thing. They were national champions, and you can't deny that. Baylor is going to have a very good year once again, but I'm just not sure if they have the talent to be ahead of Texas and Baylor this year, or Texas and Kansas this year. How does Texas look with a new head coach? Shaka Smart out, Chris Beard in. They're bringing in so much talent, so I think that Chris Beard will have a lot to work with, and I think he's a very good head coach. But there's always questions whenever there's any kind of change with a program. And then does Oklahoma State have any motivation? You're losing Cade Cunningham, but the big thing here is you're not eligible for the 2022 NCAA tournament. So I think that's definitely a big thing to watch, because if Oklahoma State starts to fall, that could really open the door for some of these other middle-of-the-pack teams like West Virginia and Oklahoma. Next up is the Pac-12. So the Pac-12, you've got 2 teams in the top 25. And the big questions here, was UCLA's magical run a fluke? Johnny Juzang led UCLA to the Final Four of the NCAA tournament last year, but there's really a lot of questions. This team barely made it into the NCAA tournament, and you really have to wonder, was that a fluke? Can they continue that into this season and win the Pac-12 convincingly? Can the conference provide more solid play? There's just not really a ton of depth in this conference, but you do look at some of these teams that have some potential, and one of those teams is Oregon State. Can Oregon State take the next step? They were really impressive in last year's NCAA tournament, pulled off a couple of upsets, and they put themselves in a position to potentially impress some people this year. Things aren't going to be perfect, but if they can at least challenge and get back into the NCAA tournament, I think that would be a solid achievement for this program. Next up in the SEC, I've got Kentucky winning the SEC here, and there's a big question. Will they bounce back? Just like Duke and North Carolina, they also had a down year last season. So how does Kentucky bounce back from that? You have so much depth, but as I mentioned earlier, so much of that is new players. And then has Nate Oates created a true power? I think Alabama could be a really good team this year. You bring back Jaden Shackelford, Javon Quinterly. Yes, you lose a few guys, but I think Alabama is still going to have a ton of talent, and I think they will be one of the best teams in the SEC. And then can Auburn improve and challenge the top? Auburn's going to have a lot of talent this year, and you lose Sharif Cooper, and he was sort of the star of the team last year, but he was not the only thing that had Auburn going. So I think Auburn takes a big step up this year. I think you've got a lot of players that have a lot of potential, and I think they could potentially get ahead of these teams like LSU and Florida this season. So now for some of the other conferences, some of the non-power conferences, I've got the A10 champion. I've got St. Bonaventure winning the A10. I've got Yale winning the Ivy League. Missouri Valley, I'm giving that to Drake. The Mountain West, San Diego State. The Mountain West is going to be a good conference. For the SoCon, I'm giving this one to Furman. Sunbelt, Georgia State, and the West Coast Conference goes to Gonzaga. So 2 of these teams are in the preseason top 25, St. Bonaventure and Gonzaga. So how good will Gonzaga be this year? Are they really the best team in college basketball? I talked about some of the guys that they lose, but you bring in Chet Holmgren, and you bring back Drew Timmy and Andrew Nembhard. This is going to be a really good team this year, but are they the best in college basketball? We're going to see that early on, but I think Gonzaga will be good once again. I just don't see any kind of collapse happening under Mark Few. How good can the Mountain West really be? I think the Mountain West has a chance to be a really, really good conference this upcoming year. Nevada is a team that I see with a lot of promise. Colorado State brings back so much talent, and San Diego State's going to be really good. It's the usual suspects in the Mountain West that are going to make this conference a really dangerous conference to watch. Boise State's going to be up there as well, along with Utah State. And then can St. Bonaventure build off their experience? They're bringing back 5 10-point-per-game scorers, and overall they're just bringing back a ton of talent. So I think St. Bonaventure could be a team to watch, and they really play in a decent conference. The A-10 has some solid teams. You've got Richmond and St. Louis and VCU that are all going to be good teams this year. And if St. Bonaventure can be the best of those teams, I think that's really going to say something. I think they can be a good team this year. So now, Player of the Year, I'm giving this to Drew Timmy from Gonzaga. He and Chet Holmgren's going to be so dangerous, but I think teams are going to end up focusing a lot on Chet, and that's going to give Drew Timmy some opportunities to score points inside. He's going to be very dominant as he was last year, and he's certainly not the best player in the country by a wide margin, but I think having Chet Holmgren on his team will certainly help him this year. But overall, I think he is a great player. And now for my projected Final Four, and then at the end, we'll have a national champion. I think Gonzaga makes the Final Four. I think Kentucky makes the Final Four. And Duke, 2 teams with a bounce back. And the 4th team making the Final Four, I think it will be St. Bonaventure. I really like this year's team for the St. Bonaventure Bonnies. It's really an exciting team when you look at it. A lot of scoring, a lot of talent on this team, and you're bringing in some guys as well, a couple transfers that are going to make an impact. So for St. Bonaventure, I know this one is just kind of out there, but I wanted to make a little bit of a wild prediction. I didn't want to just say Gonzaga and Kansas and UCLA and Texas. I wanted to go out there. I think Kentucky's going to have a ton of depth this year, and that's going to help them. Duke's going to be playing with so much motivation. Gonzaga, they're just Gonzaga. They're going to be great. And St. Bonaventure, that's kind of my Cinderella type team. So who do I think will win the national championship? Who do I think will come out as the best team in college basketball? I think it will be the Gonzaga Bulldogs. I think Gonzaga has the best team heading into the season, and while maybe they do drop a few games, maybe they aren't perfect in the regular season like they were last year, I think that they will come out on top. I think they get some redemption from last year's difficult loss in the championship game. So I think Mark Few wins a national championship with the Gonzaga Bulldogs this upcoming season here in 2022. So thank you guys for watching this video. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed, and let me know your thoughts and predictions for this upcoming 2021-2022 NBA season, or NCAA college basketball season in the comments. I'm really curious to see what you guys think, and let me know, who do you think will win the national championship? So once again, like, subscribe, let me know your thoughts and predictions in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time here on Sports Earth.